For joining us today. So my name is Liz Harkins. I am one of the member at large on Dad's board, and I'm very excited to partner with Jamie Pearson today, who is going to guide a conversation on how to support Black and Brown families as they navigate special education services. So per usual, if you have questions or comments, you can either raise your hand, you can put them directly in the chat. I will monitor that and just let Jamie know if there's anything that people want to address as we move forward. So in that regard, I will throw it to Jamie to introduce both herself and facilitate introductions and our conversation today.
Thank you so much, Liz. Thank you to everyone for joining. I've been a part of DAD for several years now, and it's been really exciting to be more involved and to get to work together on bringing awesome panelists for this webinar. So all of these people I know very well. I think all of you have known for several years. And so I'm really excited to be able to bring both professionals and parents as professionals into this space to talk about how parents and professionals can work together to support historically marginalized students with autism and intellectual disability. So I will just go down our list here, and if you could share a little bit about yourself, your children, or whatever you'd like to share related to either your role as a parent and or a professional. And then we'll get started with some of our questions that we have for today. So first and I do want to acknowledge that Danielle Sturdivant, who's on the flyer, is not able to be with us today. Her mother passed away on Tuesday, so if you could keep her in your thoughts, I think she would greatly appreciate that. So David, we'll start with you.
Great, well, thank you, and hello, everyone. My name is David Jones, and the order is correct. I'm a husband, father, and author in that order. Been married for 27 years to my lovely wife, Shanetta, and I'm the father of 3 children. Sydney is 26, Miles is 25, and Kyan, who is the one that's on the spectrum, is my cool guy. He's 14. And I'm also a grandfather of 1. So my daughter Sydney and her husband, Samaji, had a son named Roman a year ago. And we found out on his birthday that she's expecting again. So be a double grandfather. And I'm a publisher of a book. I published a book last year, excited about that. But most importantly, I'm a child of God and I'm full of faith. I'm currently in the health care management field, and I also do a little bit of foreign exchange, currency investing. I've been a teacher, a coach, account executive, benefit specialist, construction worker, patient advocate. Now I've become an autism advocate as well. I feel honored just to be on this panel of distinguished guests to just discuss what we're talking about and engage in a conversation about this topic. And so I'm looking forward to learning something as well. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, David. We're glad to have you here today. Next, we have Jennifer.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jennifer Macko. I have a Master's of Art in Teaching Special Education. I hold dual licensure in special education and elementary education. I am also the parent of a 20-year-old non-binary child who is on the spectrum. And I am a teacher and a case manager at Parkside Elementary School in Morrisville. My school is a population that is 75% students of color, with most of our students being South Asian. So that's where I'm coming from my perspective.
And fun fact about Jennifer, she's my very first student when I started at NC State. So
yeah.
Awesome.
Next we have Yuko.
Yes, hi. I'm speaking second language, so let me read it off so I won't make a mess. Okay, so good afternoon. My name is Yuko Taylor. Thank you for including me into this discussion group today. I am a visual artist living and working in Raleigh, and I was born and raised in Tokyo, Japan. I'm representing the mother in the context of being non-American native who speaks English as a foreign language. as well as non-white household, experiencing raising children with disabilities. One of my son is 28, self-diagnosed ASD. The other one is 29, non-verbal autism with African American father. And nice to meet you all.
Thank you so much, Yuko. And then last but not least, Jenn.
Hi, I'm Jenn Vrieze. I'm the director of Embrace, which is a small private clinic in Durham. We focus on creating positive social and educational experiences for kids on the spectrum. We opened in 2012 and started really small and are intentionally staying small, but also evolving with the needs of the community. So lots of change just constantly. I live here in Durham and I have 2 young kids, 2-year-old and a 6-year-old.
6 already. Awesome. Thank you so much, Jenn. All right. Liz, I'm sorry. Were we going to swap? I know this is so tacky to do this right now. Did you want to introduce our next question, or am I just going straight through?
It's totally up to you. I have our little script up here, so I can jump in if you'd like.
Okay.
Jenny, you'll edit this part out, right? Okay. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I can go ahead with the first one and then we can switch. So just in order to kind of put our conversation into context for today, we want to talk a little bit, thinking about some of the experiences of historically marginalized families and individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Many of you have noted that you have children of color, children who don't subscribe to like traditional gender identities, et cetera. And so we really want to think about those identities within the context of our conversation today. And so one of the things that we've talked quite a bit about in my own work is this focus around supporting Black families. And so a lot of the work that I do is building agency and advocacy in Black families of children with autism. And so we know, for example, that Black students are twice as likely to go unidentified with autism spectrum disorder than white children. And for many of them, many Black families and families of color face some additional barriers that really create strain in how they are able to access and utilize services effectively. And so we've done some work where we brought providers and parents together in the same room. And so what we wanted this space to be is an opportunity to kind of talk more about that. How do you support families? So what is a barrier for our panelists that you have faced or seen in families of color when accessing services? So either as a parent or a provider, what are some barriers you've seen? And then what are some strategies that you have that have been helpful for you or that you have developed to address these barriers?
So,
yeah, David.
Yeah, so I failed to mention that my children are children of color. So listen, we honestly didn't face any barriers of gaining access. I will say that we took action, and when I say we, I really mean my wife. You know, I was always traveling. She was home when we got the diagnosis of Kind when he was 4 over at UNC through their program. I think it was called Teach, if I'm not mistaken. So I know barriers exist. I will say that access to service has to start with, I believe, a recognition that something is amiss. That we noticed some things, right? The speech was a little delayed or things like that. Then there was a willingness, and I really believe it has to be a willingness to seek help, right? And the parent or guardian has to initiate or ignite that flame. The first barrier, in my humble opinion, is sometimes a denial of an issue or an unwillingness to seek that help. And so that's what we did, you know. So one of the first barriers, and I know there are barriers with the socioeconomic portion, but it also starts with the recognition that there are some things that may not be, and I don't like to use the word normal, but there are some things that were a little different, right? And so we And again, when I say we, I would say Shanetta was 90% ahead of me with the process, because again, I was traveling a lot. I wasn't seeing as much as she was seeing. And also she really had the time to pursue it. And I will say some of the strategies was one, being an advocate for your children. It's very important that we advocate for them and for our community. Shanetta was able to share with a lot of our friends who had children that were on the spectrum. She introduced them to you because you were our go-to. I mean, any questions we had, Dr. Pearson, we got to reach out to him. Also, get out of our own way and not be a stumbling block to our child's path to success. So we had to do that, and then educate yourself. You know, obviously you had some information, but we had to be willing to go above and beyond that, and educate ourselves and seeking help. There's a stigma that seeking help is a bad thing in our community, right? That there's some level of weakness if you have to ask for help. And we tried to debunk that myth and say, listen, there's help that's needed, let's get it. There's nothing wrong with asking for help. And so those are some of the strategies that we used in our process.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David.
You're welcome.
Anybody else on the panel want to jump in? We don't necessarily have to go in the same order. Jennifer?
Sure. So I'm coming at this as a provider. And so one of the things is that, you know, I really appreciate what David said about going out and advocating for your child. In the school system, sometimes we are the first ones who recognize that there may be a student on the spectrum. If they're having academic difficulties, they may have gone through the tiered intervention process and then be referred to special education. So it may not be something that a family has considered. And when we're going through that evaluation and eligibility process, one of the barriers we do have to be mindful is that systemic inequality, and that those populations have historically been marginalized. And I think where this comes up is that there can be a mistrust. And so when we are talking about, we recommend testing your child, and when you recommend testing the child, you do have to note what category of eligibility you are considering. And so you end up having to go through those categories, and you may be the first person explaining your child's performance, their present level of academic performance and their functional performance, those are meeting the category of autism. And to do that with families who may not trust the system, key is building rapport and trust. And so one of the things that I really try to make a point to do is explain the holistic approach of evaluation, that we're not just giving standardized testing, because we know that there are inherent biases in that standardized testing. And so we need to talk about, we're doing testing, but we're also doing observations. We're going to do a social developmental history. All of these pieces all go together. And then when you're discussing that data, for me, it's very important that parents recognize their children in the data that I'm discussing. When we go to grad school, sometimes everything is data-based, right? You're reporting your data and you're saying what the present level performance is. But if you don't put that family's child's face in that data and say, after you report the numbers, also say, and observation notes show that so-and-so performed better when asked to write sentences about his particular area of interest, maybe it's planets, then the parent starts going, oh yeah, that's my kid. And developing that rapport really helps them to trust you and feel like, okay, they know my kid, they've got my kid. And so then they're more likely to trust the process, and we can develop a stronger partnership and work together. The other thing is the barriers that I've faced is culturally, what does the diagnosis of autism mean? And for some of my families that, as I said, my school is primarily South Asian, the diagnosis of what autism is very challenging. And so parents may say things like, well, now you're saying something's wrong with my child's brain, Or my IA who explained to me, from our culture, a lot of times autism is synonymous with using the R word. And so being mindful when we're talking with families that is what they may be hearing when we are talking about autism. So the strategy we use is we explain in the schools, we do not do a medical diagnosis in the school. What we are looking at is which category do they meet the criteria for as far as behaviors and performance for a category of eligibility, not a diagnosis. And when we approach it from that perspective, parents seem to be a little bit more accepting and willing to participate in the process, because it's a very hard thing to hear, as a lot of us on this panel know, that your child may have autism. And especially if there are cultural barriers to that, we just, as providers, it really becomes incumbent on us to how can we reach out and partner with those families.
Great. That's great, Jen.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer. How about you, Yuko?
Yes, I think I have a little bit of different perspective because I was totally alone when this happened. I feel like the Raleigh 30 years ago was a bit different place for me and my standing. I'm not so sure how to evaluate my experience of missing or accessing services. I need help raising my children, not because my son needed special needs, but the whole society was a blank to me because of my language walls. And I have autistic sons who diagnosed at the age of 2.5. That's just the severe one who is older. And I attended Teach conference by chance for the interpretation of the group who traveled from Japan. And I then realized my own son has autism. And that's the time that he was about 2 years old. And I asked for help to the conference leaders who are diagnosed desperately, and grabbed them and got the information, phone number, no email back then. However, I have never heard from them. And the super hope of the Teach being close to my home address was never a benefit to me, even still today. I don't know what happened. So my son is now 20 years old. I have some idea now that there was several moments of my son's life. If I spoke more fluent American English, to mingle with others easily, the opportunity of finding more service were much easier. Perhaps, I'm not very sure on that, but accessibility might be available. I don't know for sure. I've done the best I could. But during the chaos that I lived in, I did not feel much about it. I was very alone throughout the experiences anyway. In my own language before I came to the United States. Therefore, I found our way, the best way we can possibly handle. I'm thinking now that I'm a trailblazer, and to think this way, I feel better about this whole endeavor. And you will not surprise that I know that it's not going to end here because of this wall that I have built up with me, that insecurity of my language and things like that. So whatever that people try to help us, I still don't know if I'm really getting everything of the possibilities here.
Thank you so much, Yuko. You brought up a lot of great points there, and it reminds me of some of the interviews we've done with other parents, particularly mothers who've shared, single parent mothers who've shared those same experiences, right? Like me sort of navigating this life as a parent and sort of trying to get generally the supports we need as our family for our overall family quality of life sort of supersedes this need to seek a diagnosis or identification for my child, right? It's just like overall, let's get by day to day. And so that's a really critical piece there. All right, Jenn, what about some barriers and facilitators for you?
Yeah, I want to address a barrier that I see commonly, unfortunately, with families of color that come to me with older kids, like older elementary and middle school and high school kids who have had experiences in public schools with kind of a misdiagnosis in some ways, where if they're having behaviors in the classroom, they're getting punished repeatedly for those rather than being provided with supportive services. And this is creating just issues that are exponential. And so families are ending up in more of a crisis mode, and such a barrier to getting the help that the individual needs. So that's some of the work that we're doing at Embrace, is to provide a place that is really listening to what those behaviors are saying, that those behaviors are really communication, and looking at the functions of those behaviors, finding ways that we can not be punishing individuals for the coping strategies that they're using, but supporting them, helping them to get the support that they need. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jen. So we will move into our next question. And again, if you all have comments or questions, feel free to bring those into the chat. So one of the other things that we know, and sort of a big topic area specifically around supporting families of color and historically marginalized students, is this the impact of biases among educators and providers, and even that we parents and caregivers. And so given the biases that educators often have, those that are both implicit and explicit, and the impact that they can have on student success, there's this idea that some educators, say, I don't see color. I try not to let that impact how I support my students. What obstacles have you all faced or experienced when navigating your own biases or of those of an educator, so one of your children's teachers or professionals? And then how can educators recognize and combat these biases? So maybe we can go in reverse order this time and start back with Jen.
Take the pressure off.
Yeah, this is huge. I think that unacknowledged bias is such a huge barrier, right? And as a white person, as a white therapist and educator, like, I have to look at that every day, at my bias and my privilege every day, and ask myself, why am I making certain treatment decisions? And specifically as the director of a business, like, I have to ask what kind of culture I'm creating. Is this a culture that is normalizing like white culture, or that's questioning that normalization and creating a space where the culture of all of my students is highlighted and coming together to create that safe place? Because if students don't feel safe in the environment that we have, they're not going to learn, they're not going to meet their goals. Another key with that is just never assuming that I know what's best for a student, a client, a family. What I think is right is not necessarily the priority of that family. So I really have to ask and listen and be open to hearing that response that I'm getting about what the family feels is most important. So that's a big thing. And then just in terms of the content of conversations and the curriculum that I'm putting forth, I work really hard to make sure that that is actively anti-racist, and that I'm doing the work to build a curriculum that is highlighting the voices of people who are not often heard, and highlighting the voices and experiences of people in my students' communities, so that they're learning to be part of their own communities rather than to meet the goals of my family. Like, so I think that's part of addressing my own bias and pulling in those perspectives.
Awesome. That representation is so critical, Jen. I think, you know, you hit on all of those points so well in thinking about how do our students see themselves and see their communities in the schools and in different contexts where they're learning. Yuko, what would you say have been either some biases you've faced or even your own, and how you've sort of navigated those?
My son is brown because they are mixed with me and African American. So Jamie, you have seen them, right? So gingerbread boy. So that's what my husband told me. So yeah. So they are half African American and half Asian Japanese. If there's any bias to count as a problem or potentially problematic, it is that we don't belong to anything. So the school was very diverse. They went to Enloe High School and Leesville High School, if you know those areas. And my children did not have identity in school in racial divided settings. It's just, that's what happened. And the ignorant thing is that I am a foreigner, that I never experienced that high school, middle school in America. So I had no aware of what they are actually facing in the school settings within the color of the skin or the home culture that I am giving them. And so we're always surprised to see there are a whole lot of issues in the cultural background ties into the students' body of groups and interest in their learning. Actually, my non-disabled son, who has a self-diagnosed autism spectrum disorder, had a much harder time earning the presence in his classroom because he has certain communication disabilities. And but generally speaking, the special education classroom my older son, who's a severe autism experienced, was so much nicely mingled, and I have never seen anything biased treatment nor the friendship going through the experience of his. And he doesn't have no bias in any colors or nothing like that. Teacher was all nice. And that's very interesting to know that the non-severe the autistic person had a harder time actually in that setting.
Thank you so much, Yuko. And my apologies, my internet is a little bit unstable if I'm a little paused. So we will keep going along to Jennifer. What are your experiences and biases that you've recognized both for yourself and with other educators or families?
So I obviously come from the perspective, we are an environmentally friendly school. So if I do not keep moving, my lights will go off. So obviously I come from the perspective of a Caucasian middle-class woman. I'm married, cisgender, and I like to think that I'm doing the work, you know, and that I am aware. But I'll just be really vulnerable with you guys and tell you that, you know, I become aware that I do still have implicit biases. As an example, in my experience as a Caucasian woman, traditionally, the mother has been the contact for schools. Usually it's the mothers who are involved, the mothers who tend to attend the IEP meetings more frequently. In my school, that's not the case. Many of the times it is only the father. And my primary contact is the father. And I found myself wondering, well, why aren't the moms involved? You know, because that was my perspective. That was my bias. And luckily, I am in a school where the staff is very diverse. The principal has made diversity training a priority. We have a meeting almost every month. And it's created an environment and a culture where we can ask those kind of questions, where I can say, you know, is this something cultural that is different from what my experience is? And there are people on staff who are open enough to say, yes, it is different. And for example, my IA taught school in India, and she explained to me that when she was teaching, yes, many women were the teachers, but women were not, mothers did not come to any of the meetings. It was always the father. And so there was a cultural difference there that I was not even aware of. And it took speaking with others to learn what the cultural experience is so that I could better understand what was happening and so that I could better relate to my families. So as far as what do I need to do to combat those biases, for me, it is developing a PLT, a professional learning team around me that reflects the community in which I teach. So my school, my special education and intervention department is 50% people of color for the teachers and staff. And my mentor and department head is a woman of color. And so I really look to those people to hopefully know my heart and know that when I'm asking these questions, I really do want to understand and do better and be an effective teacher. And they seem to all understand that when I'm asking questions, it's because I want to do better, but it's really because the admin has created a community where we can do that. And I do want to say that the way I developed the ability to go, okay, this is a safe space, I can ask these questions, is from Dr. Pearson, because she created that same kind of community when I was in graduate school within the master's program for special education. That same thing of, hey, if we don't ask the questions, we're never going to be able to figure this out. And so that's where I kind of developed the strategy and continue to apply that here.
Well, that makes me feel good, Jennifer. You know, I think that's really so important. Even when we do presentations, I still like to remind people that this is a safe space to have those conversations. And we talk a lot about this notion of cultural reciprocity, and what you describe is exactly that in motion, right? Identifying my own biases and then working to address those, working to gain better cultural understandings, and then applying that, right? So not just this like cultural competence, but really putting each step into motion. And so that's very, very important. How about for you, David? What biases have you had to either identify in yourself or work against in the school system?
Yeah. So I don't think educators should not see color when educating a student. Unfortunately, I know that this is not always the case. As a former educator, I find it somewhat disingenuous when I hear someone say that they don't see color, because you do. And there appeared to be a different standard of excellence for one group's success over another, sometimes based solely on someone's socioeconomic or racial background. We are in a society that is extremely race sensitive, and it doesn't disappear when we cross the thresholds of a classroom, you know? And so I taught a group of 19 students who were labeled at risk. At the time, I had no idea what at risk means. I still don't know if I do, but, and I know that it was 17 African-Americans and 2 Caucasian. I still know their names, and this was 1997 when I did this. However, I taught them as individuals, not as a race of people. Math has no color, nor does English, nor does science or anything. So I taught them the subjects. Now, I had a bias, you know, so when I was told that I had this class at risk, I was thinking of myself as Joe Clark from Lean On Me, if you remember that movie. You have to come in and fix these rambunctious kids, because I knew that at risk wasn't the same as academically gifted, right? So there was a bias right there. So biases just doesn't happen with people that are non-color, you know. I mean, it happened with me. I had a bias going in because of how are these kids gonna act? These are kids who have been retained 2, sometimes 3 times. They were, you know, much older than people in their normal class. And I found out that some of them were academically gifted, but they had to deal with the other things that were happening in their homes, taking care of their younger siblings, you know, that the other teachers didn't have the time to go to this homes to check and see what was going on. When I found out the root of the issue, then I could deal with the issue. And so those biases were there. And so I just had to come to terms and realize that not to label the children. And then when I changed that at risk, because it was clearly saying they were at risk of dropping out or doing something bad. And I told them when they came to my class, they were only at risk of succeeding at a high level, because that was the standard of excellence. And I didn't have a standard of excellence for Jamal that was different from Kathy. The standard of excellence was the best. And so once we do that, I think it's better. And I know some may be coming from a different level, because I did an assessment with all of my students. Some had, this was 7th and 8th grade. Some had a 3rd grade reading level, some 5th grade. So I had to build upon that, right? But I'm still building upon that and saying, I still want you to get here. So it wasn't, you're here, I want you to get there, you're here, you know, no. And so, and that's hard work. You know, educators can have to combat a lot of things. And so focusing on the individual's needs while also recognizing that some students have more barriers and obstacles than others. It's a tall task, but I think it's one that can, you know, I applaud you all for what you do. You're in the classroom, you're dealing with it, because I actually couldn't do it much longer, because I was because I, you know, and I really thought, I went to a school that didn't have a Black male figure. There were no Black male teachers. And I automatically thought, here I come to save the day, you know, and because they need to hear it from me. I have the same background. Well, to some degree that helps, but at some point, you can have the same background, but they still aren't hearing you, you know? And so you have to find out what is it that they're not hearing. And then it takes time to get to the root of an issue. And that's, this is why I think teaching is the one of the hardest jobs other than parent, you know, because you're dealing with not only children, but you're dealing with the children and their families, and a lot of things that you have to overcome. So, and there are some stigmas that go along with the African American community. You know, one thing I found that sports seem to break all the barriers. You know, I was on teams with a lot of different races. And it's amazing how when we're in the confines of the sport, we're all one. It was once we stepped outside of the gym or everything else that now the barriers go back up. And I found that to be, I still find that, it's still like that, you know, and I find that to be very strange how we can come together and to accomplish a particular goal. But once we've accomplished it or not, once that period of time is gone, now we go back to my corner, my culture, my whatever. And I just think we need to take that outside of that, you know, and also with the different, you know, people on spectrum or whatever, being able to incorporate that a little bit more. So I admit I've had biases as well, and I'm overcoming those.
Thank you so much, David.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that was actually a perfect segue into our last question. And so, you know, thinking about, you know, Black students in particular, and then other historically marginalized students or students from ethnic minority populations, one of the things that we've seen in the literature, that we've seen in practice, is that often these students accept their own sort of cultural and experiential filters, right? And so, although I know, David, you noted that even for you having that shared background, there were still some challenges. But what would you all say is the first step for practitioners to kind of build that bridge with their students, whether you have a shared background or not? So like, how do we facilitate these positive partnerships with our students and with our families to support stronger outcomes? What if we start in the middle this time with Yuko? Switch it up. You're still paused, Yuko.
Yeah, I see the challenge and everything, but I am very sorry. I don't know how to fix this problem. I don't think there's any way to fix it. When I personally take this in, I do have image of the what kind of color of the skin or the people who I'm talking to. There's some bias before I meet this person. I can categorize these people as similar to that type of, the hierarchy or cultural background or what they eat or something like that. I have a great idea on that. And read it through everything to understand. But as soon as I personally know this person in this context, a student, I think me personally, all the colors and background will just disappear, and I personally be able to talk to this person. So maybe that is the only way that we learn how to do that, so that you can have a classroom more open to the person-to-person relationship. I don't think there is any pill that we can take to break this whole thing. Everybody has a different background. Everybody has different colors, and that's something that we need to celebrate about. And I don't want to talk about this, huge flower kind of, nice way of taking this in, but it is that you just have to deal with this person. That's only way we can take this wall down. Sorry, I don't have a great answer, but yeah.
No, that is a great answer, Yuko. Really thinking about, just like you said, breaking down those barriers, breaking down those walls, and just really getting to know each individual person, each family, each student. That's so critical in how we build rapport. What would you say, Jenn? How do practitioners, what's our first step?
I think starting with looking at our own, understanding our own identities and the intersectionality of our identities. Because if we're coming from that place of understanding how all of the parts of ourselves interact, we'll be better able to understand how other people are experiencing the world. And then we can make those connections, as Yuko was saying, with the individuals. Again, I just think listening to what people in the Black community are building and supporting that, listening to what people in the autistic community are building and supporting that. That's really important, rather than like pushing what I think is most important. I think people will see that I'm trying to learn what's happening in their own communities. Also understanding the difference between educating yourself and like appropriating culture, that students can definitely pick up on if you are trying to learn something and trying to understand, rather than like trying to take and misuse some cultural aspects that would not be helpful in making those relationships. And then from just as a white person, like encouraging white people to talk about race with each other and like take away some of the weight of those conversations. I think a lot of white people are scared to talk about race and culture. And if we can support each other, white people together, hold each other accountable to start having those conversations more, I think that'll help in our relationships with people of color as well, being able to have those conversations across race and across culture.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jenn. And how about for you, Jennifer?
So I thought this question was really interesting because I don't know if you remember this, but back when I first started grad school, I said to you, I know students of color are taught that, learn better. The data shows they learn better from teachers who reflect them. And I was like, but how do I do that? And you said, well, there aren't enough teachers right now to, so we need to equip our, Caucasian or white teachers to be able to work with students of color. And so I guess what I like to do is address this kind of the answer to this to pre-service teachers. What about like people who are in my position of, well, I do want to work with all students and students of color. So what do I do since I don't have that perspective? And so for me, where that started was realizing that there are a lot of positions for special education teachers. You almost have your pick. And so when you go out and interview, I think you can ask this question of the administration that's interviewing you and asking, what sort of professional development do you do in your school regarding diversity training? So when I was interviewing, I specifically wanted a school that included diversity training because I was coming from the perspective of a parent of, you know, looking at gender diversity and neurodiversity. And I wanted to work in a school where I could put up a picture of my family and not feel weird about that. Like that was really important to me. So it was okay for me to ask those questions. And so I think as for pre-service teachers, that you can go in asking questions about what do you do to promote diversity? What do you do to help equip your staff to work with all of our students? And so find a position that fits that. So that was the first part. And then we do the professional development. We do the work. We have book clubs outside of professional development at my school so that teachers can also continue to educate themselves. Like I said, getting a mentor, someone who you can just be vulnerable with and not worry about putting your foot in your mouth, because I do that a lot. I know what I'm meaning to say, but it doesn't always come out as eloquent. And, you know, and having people who will be like, yeah, we can have this conversation. It's okay, just say it. And so that's where would be my advice for anybody coming out who's kind of wondering the same thing of, well, how do I become an effective teacher if I know that students should be taught through their own cultural and experiential filters?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the things we're working really hard to do in higher ed is building those conversations, having those conversations and building those practices in pre-service teachers, right? So that they, when they get to that next step, they have that ability to advocate and that agency to really, you know, sort of demand that we be in a space that's inclusive and that we engage in practices that address the needs of diverse communities. So thank you, Jennifer. Wow. And then David, kind of wrapping back around, because you sort of kicked this question off in a really nice way. You know, what would you recommend for either early career teachers or practitioners more broadly?
Well, you know, Jen said it during the very first time she spoke when she said, building a rapport and building trust. Those are two things that I specifically remember as being, those are important because there's this level of untrust or mistrust or whatever that children typically have with people that don't look like them. You know, I don't know where that comes from. I don't know how that comes about, but it is. It's there. And so you've heard this. Can you guys hear me okay? I know Jamie's okay. You know, the thing is, you've heard the saying, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, right? And one of my best teachers, my favorite teacher of all time, his name is Mrs. Cleo Corbett, my 9th grade English teacher. I was a good student and she pushed me to be a great student. She would not accept mediocrity, but it wasn't just for me, that's how it was across the board. But she particularly took an interest in me because she knew my family, she's like, now I know there's more in you. I remember having to recite the poem Invictus, out of the night that covers me black as a pit from pole to pole. I can recite it now and I said it, and just like everybody else, but she gave me a B because she was like, I didn't say it with enthusiasm. Because she knew that I could do it better. One of my second favorite teachers was Miss Grady. She was a white teacher, but she was a math teacher. Same thing. She would say, David, take your time, finish your work. You finish it fast, but go back, you make little careless mistakes. Instead of you making 100, you made an 85 because you didn't put the net, or, you know, it was so they showed that they cared, you know, and that's what really counts. So to any practitioner, it starts with being genuine about, and I don't think anyone goes into that field without being genuine. You can't fake that, or, you know, so, but when they know that you take a particular interest in them, they'll be talking about you 10, 15, 20 years after you taught them. So it starts, I think, there. And once you do that, that's all that you can do. When you've done all that you could, then you let it, you release it, you know. So that's my take on that.
I really like the way you put that, David, because I think when we pause and we think about, is there more that I can do, right? Like, is there more professional development that I can do? Can I reach out to my families more, right? When that answer is yes, then you have more work to do.
Right.
So that's very critical. So we have a few more minutes and about 7 minutes left. Liz and I would love to just kind of open this up to a broader discussion if anyone has additional comments or questions for our panel. David?
Yeah, I just have some comments. You know, I noticed, you know, we've done these a couple times, or, you know, when you had the class, and my appeal is always to Black males. I think I may be the only one on this call, right? Or maybe, I'm not sure, but I'm looking to establish something. I have about 4 or 5 friends who have children on the spectrum, and we need to talk about it more. We need to, and just what I was talking about, being an advocate, initiating and talking about it, having a conversation, and not just pushing it over in the corner like it doesn't exist. Now, that's one thing that the Black community, African-American community, I grew up seeing people who were considered had a mental illness or whatever, and you'll see them walking and, you know, there were names, or, you know, oh, they're doing this, they're shell shocked, or whatever it may be. And there was no attention applied to them. You just knew that something was a bit off. As opposed to saying, what can we do to help that? You just accepted it. And that's where we can't just accept when something is a bit off, when there's something we could possibly do about it. Or if we don't know what to do, find out, you know? And so that's what we're gonna try. My wife and I are trying to take the initiative to bring groups together to be able to do that. And we want to lean on you all as well, because it's not just us, it's everyone that can provide some assistance to this, because this is not just our issue. This is obviously affecting a lot of people. And I thank you on the front lines who are doing what you do so tirelessly to help with this.
Thank you so much, David. And do let us know how we can support you, because that's very important to be able to connect with other families and fathers in particular.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? While everyone else is thinking, Yuko, I would love, I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit. I would love it if you could share a little bit more about King. And we haven't talked a lot about this specifically, but thinking about his transition into adulthood and how you have helped him in his artistry and in the work that he does as a young adult. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that experience has been like for you and King?
Okay, I hope I can do it good. Okay, my son, the severely autistic one, who is almost nonverbal, and when he turned into 21, he had to choose a job because of the transition, and then we had no idea what he wanted to do. He could do. He has a small stature. He can work in a warehouse, just can't do a lot of lifting or anything like that. And we just sat and thought about what he wants to do. And one day he said, okay, I want to be a painter, Mom, in a very short way that he can do. It's like, what? I never see you paint before that much. So I was really confused, but well, I guess, he can't really do much anyway to start it with. So I took him to a bookstore and then show him how do you want to paint? And he showed me something so bright and some repetitive, some crazy circles around, onto this magazine. It's like, okay, so let's do that. And then go home and then gave him the paints and canvas of mine and let him do it. He started painting. I couldn't believe it. He was just trying. And so then I said one day, hey, yeah, you can do this to mess up all my canvases, but you gotta put some kind of feelings into your canvases because you're an artist, right? And then he said, oh yeah, oh, okay. Then he started putting this numbers. It's like, what are you doing, King? His name is King. And what are you doing? So I'm putting the feelings onto my canvas. I was like, okay. And then he filled the numbers into the canvas like really, really obsessively. And there's a particular number that goes into it repeatedly and then make the patterns like weaving almost. And that became his icon. And he put the animals like this, very smiley faces and lots of colors. And then I realized, oh my God, this is his mirror image. Wow, I did not know he was a happy person, like this bright color paintings. And so do you feel this good in your head too? He said, yeah. Oh wow, I thought that he was a miserable autistic person who can't talk. No, that's not true. He was very happy, very positive, enthusiastic, strong person. And I had no idea that was in him. So I just pushed him and I dropped everything that I was doing. And just he's very emerging artist in this region. He also being selected as a 20 of 20s in Raleigh magazine, that he was selected as non-speaking person to be an artist for his career. And it's amazing. Thank you so much, Jamie, for letting me say it. But
yeah, absolutely.
yeah. So, but this,
And
I didn't do anything, but I helped him the best way I know how. So
right.
yeah.
And thank you for sharing that. I put the King's website link in the.
Oh, thank you. Please.
Out is just how much we think about supporting students, autistic students, as they graduate and as they go into post-secondary experiences, right? And so this is one way that you have been able to really cultivate a lifestyle and a career for him, and something that he loves. And so I've gotten to see some of that, and I think it's important that we continue having these conversations, particularly with families of color who are really struggling with what are the next steps for my child, right? Like, what do we do after this? And so your experience and King's experience is very encouraging, Yuko. And so I thought this might be a great thing to share with our group here today. So thank you for that.
I'll be sure to share that link in the YouTube notes.
Awesome. Well, I will turn it back over to Liz to wrap us up.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I say this every time, but what a powerful conversation that we had today. And a special thank you to our 4 panelists for, guiding us with this really important conversation. So our next, Megan, I think you're coordinating our June one. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's Friday, June 4th.
Correct.
Okay, that's our next webinar. I think our last one of the season. So Megan, can you just remind me and announce what that was focused on?
Sure. For that webinar, we're going to focus on the transition out of your doctoral program into your career. We'll have 4 panelists who all serve different roles in the first couple of years after their doctoral program.
Great. So if you can join us, please do. And once again, a very big thank you to our panelists, and then especially for Jamie, because I know that you put a lot of work in coordinating this today as well. So we're very appreciative. And David, please keep in touch and remember DADD with your work, and we would be happy to support that moving forward as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think we need to bring this panel to the next conference.